I'd like to finish off this series. I thought I was going to finish it yesterday, but I wanted to add a couple of things. There are some who make a very, I would say, important general point about Purim and Hanukkah, about the two of them. That they're not just events that happened once upon a time, but they illustrate rules that really should be put into practice. Purim and Hanukkah, the challenges were very different, and the responses of the Jewish people were different. I hinted at that yesterday, but I didn't have a chance to elaborate on it. In the case of Purim, the challenge was purely physical. To kill every Jew. Made no difference what your philosophy was, what your religion was. There was no way out to say, I'll support Haman and propose him and express everything else. It wouldn't matter. Just kill every Jew. What was the response of the Jewish people? To do tshuva and to pray. A totally spiritual response. Hanukkah, the challenge was cultural, religious, philosophical, spiritual. A Jew who, as many did, went over to the Greek side, adopted Greek philosophy, adopted Greek customs. There were schools in the land of Israel teaching children according to the Greek style. The Greeks had no problem with him. They didn't want to kill Jews. They wanted to stamp out Torah. There the response was entirely different. We have no record of a mass tshuva response, fasting, praying. No, they took up arms and fought a battle. I think it was the Chafetz Chaim who said that in the 20th century, where, as you very well know, both types of challenges took place, Chafetz Chaim only lived to see one of them, that we should have followed the same rule. Who played the role of the Assyrians, the Greeks, in the 20th century? The Soviet Union. They declared war on all religion, that's true, but particularly the Jewish religion. And they used every resource available to them to stamp out Torah. And it was so bitter that Jews who ran away from yeshivas were recruited by what was called the Yevsektia, the Jewish section, to give them information about how to crush Torah. So those Jews who had run away from the yeshivas told them, be very careful not to allow private bakeries in the end of the winter, in the beginning of spring. No private bakeries. No baking of bread. Because that's when they're going to bake matzah for Pesach. Make sure they don't have it. No private pools to bathe in. No mikveh. No ethrog in the fall. They knew exactly where to attack Jews so as to deprive them of the ability to do mitzvos and to depress them. So I have heard in the name of the Chafetz Chaim that in Russia, they should have followed the example of the Maccabees. This was a direct spiritual challenge. We're going to wipe out Torah. The Jews should have taken up arms, I guess joined the White Russians in resisting the communists, and fought against them. Of course, Jews did not, in any wide population, do that, and the communists were successful. Shortly after the Chafetz Chaim died in 1933, the Nazis came to power, and the Nazi ideology was a repeat of Purim. We don't care what you have in your head. We don't care what you believe. If one grandparent was Jewish, you're dead. You could be as assimilated as you like. Wouldn't matter. So there, learning from history, there should have been a mass tshuva movement. And there wasn't. So, and of course there, the Nazis were tragically all too successful. So the idea of learning from history, these things that happen to us, I wouldn't make a general law out of it. Sometimes things happen because of the unique circumstances of the time, and they wouldn't happen under other conditions. But sometimes not true. And it takes people who are great Torah scholars to, first of all, distinguish, and second of all, to formulate the rule that should be followed. What are the conditions that trigger what kind of response? And the 20th century can be read as colossal Jewish failures in both cases. At any rate, we should think in terms of the challenge that face us. Now, of course, it's not up to each and every Jew to make his own decision, just like you don't make your own decisions about surgery, about how to invest your spare cash, not if you're smart, or how to fix your car. Certainly don't make decisions how we should collectively serve God. That's up to the leaders of the generation. But you can see where they're coming from, that these events in history give us an insight into what kinds of challenges we face and what kinds of responses are the right kinds of responses. That's one thing. The other thing, I wanted to take a look at Al Anisim. In the Cedar, where am I here? One place that you find it is on page, I can't see anything, 113. You have 5 terms in your Cedar, you Ashkenazim. We have 7 in the Sephardi, European Sephardi version. This is an expression of gratitude for what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for us. I believe, and I think I'm following the Abu Jahab, that Modim starts with a short paragraph which is praise, where Moda means I admit, I affirm, I assert, and then it switches to Nodelecha, and Nodelecha is we're giving thanks. Now this is in the part that's under the title Nodelecha. It says, for miracles, salvation, mighty deeds, victories, and battles. We've spoken about miracles in the last few weeks at great length. I'm not going to elaborate on that. Salvation is obvious. Mighty deeds, gvura, the idea of power. Power vis-a-vis the Creator doesn't mean the power to move a galaxy. That's not power, that's trivial. He gives it its existence. Should I have trouble moving it? What kind of, so to speak, resistance that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to overcome would be worthy of titling him powerful? We say, oh, listen, you can overcome that, that's something. That's really something. What is it that would be difficult for him to overcome? Even if you think of the free will of human beings, there's nothing in the strength of free will, nothing in the power of free will that resists divine power. The only thing that protects a person's free will is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has decided himself not to interfere, usually. And that's the key to the answer. The key to the answer is, when you speak about HaKadosh Baruch Hu and attribute to him strength, what you mean is that one aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's actions, one principle of action, could be in conflict with another of his own principles of action. And for principle A to win and dictate the outcome, it has to overcome principle B. That's real resistance, because something divine is resisting the divine. That's real resistance. And then when principle A overcomes principle B, That means that principle A has the power to overcome something on its own level. So, for example, when God treats us with strict justice, when God punishes, let's say, that always requires overcoming the principle of chesed, of loving kindness, which is the purpose of all creation. The principle of loving kindness is a principle of giving because the agent is a giver, not because the recipient deserves it. If the recipient deserves it, it's not loving kindness. It's justice. No, you give him when he doesn't deserve it. So, at any time to withhold, and in particular to punish, that requires holding back loving kindness. And loving kindness is a divine principle. Gevura, as a divine principle of action, always involves holding back, because loving kindness always applies. It always applies. Unlike mercy, loving kindness always applies. So anytime Gevura takes place, anytime strict justice takes place, anytime that full-fledged loving kindness doesn't express itself, it has to be held back. That's why this particular characteristic is called Gevura, is called power. Because without power it can't exist. Sometimes loving kindness overcomes justice also. The balance can swing in both directions. But there, it's not essential to loving kindness that it be powerful, because it can operate when there's no resistance. Gevura can't operate when there's no resistance. There's always resistance to Gevura, because loving kindness is always relevant. So that's the idea here, Gevuros, and that always means, in part, that we didn't deserve the help. And therefore, he did Gevuros to us. Well, no, let me cancel that. That doesn't belong here. And the victories in battles are obvious. Okay. Now, the main paragraph on the next page starts, Bimei Mordechai Esther. And on Hanukkah is Bimei Matis Yoel ben Yochanan. That's not just literature. That's a very, very fundamental idea. There's a famous Rashi, when Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu to go, leave his homeland, Lech Lecha, so he says, no, I'm sorry, not there. When Yaakov leaves on his journey, Vayetzi Yaakov Beersheva v'elech Harana. Yaakov left Haran. He left Haran to go to Beersheva and went to go to Haran. So if he's going, he's got to leave where he is. So you don't have to tell me that he's leaving. Of course he's leaving. So Rashi says there, Yitzias Tzadik min hamakom osa roshin. When the Tzadik leaves a place, it makes an impact on the place. I think here the Torah, as a culture, has a certain perspective which you don't find, at least in what I know of other human perspectives, although there may be others that do have the same idea. What's great about a city? What about a city which, if you changed it, you'd say it's not the same city? Let's say Paris, right? If someone 10 miles upriver in the Seine River blocked up the river, and the whole of the depression in which the river flows in Paris would go dry, and you don't have the two banks of the river and so forth and so on, people would say it's not the same city. The river is so important a feature, it's just not the same city. Same thing's true sometimes with buildings, with parks. They say, that's gone, it's not the same. I never heard anyone of all of the Goyish culture with which I've been in contact, when someone dies, say it's not the same city. He's not there, it's not the same city. They don't take people to create part of the essence of the place that they're in. We see it differently. We say, like Rashi said here, Vayetzi Yaakov, Jacob went out of Beersheva, Yitzias Tzadik ben Hamakom osa roshim. It's not the same place. A Jew would come to a city, would come there to interact with the people there. And if some of the great people who used to be there weren't there, he would say it's not the same city. That's why it starts out here, B'mei Mordechai ve'Esther. Why? That's an explanation out of 100, and this is superficial, there are deeper ones. I would say that's why. And the other one starts, B'mei Matisyahu ben Yochanan. How do I locate the time in history? It could be located by the king, it could be located by the kingdoms that exist at the time. No, it's located by the people whose existence controls the events that take place at that time. And those are the tzaddikim, whoever they happen to be. They're the ones who give the time its stamp, just like they give the city its stamp, they give the place a stamp, he gives the time a stamp. Now, all the action takes place in Shushan Abira, in the capital. Everywhere else, the consequences flow out. But the entire set of action takes place in Shushan Abira. And it's not trivial because it's all a matter of malchus. It's all a matter of how kingship, rulership expresses itself in the natural world and how the divine providence makes use of it. I told you that the books in the Tanakh are really stories of someone's life. And on the surface, it looks like Megillas Esther is a story about part of the life of Achashverosh. It starts with Achashverosh and ends with Achashverosh. Who cares about the taxes that he put on the islands? And to be told all the rest of his great and glorious accomplishments are written in the history books of the Persians of the Medes. So what? What's our interest in that? So in a certain sense, the book is presented as chronicles of Achashverosh. And it's more than just presented that way. It's more than just it starts and ends. He's all the way through. His actions carry all the way through. And that means that here's an example of how, from divine providence's point of view, how kings are used against them in their ignorance and against their will, are used for the purpose of doing for the Jewish people what the Jewish people needs. So the Jews are here in a sense in the worst possible position. They're in exile, and in addition to being in exile, they're being attacked by the prime minister with the permission of the king. And under those conditions, HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulates the events so that the king himself becomes their salvation, and Mordechai's plans turn against him and undo him. This is an example of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu operates behind the scenes in terms of great powers. And this is something which happens throughout history. Sometimes we see it, and sometimes we don't. But it happens throughout history. Anyway, so it starts off pointing out Mordechai and Esther, and in the capital. When Haman, the wicked Haman, stood up against them, attempted, I don't know how they translate here. Okay, they just don't translate it, they leave it out. I would translate Bikesh attempted to destroy, to kill, to erase all the Jews, from young to old, children and women, in one day, 13th day of the month of Adar, the 12th month, the month of Adar. And to take their possessions. Now, I think there's a reference here to the fact that when we took revenge against our enemies, we also had written into our permission slip that we could take their possessions, and we didn't. What's the difference? What's the difference? Even Haman, when he accused the Jewish people to the king, he said they're split, they're geographically dispersed, they're internally divided, their laws are different from the laws of all other nations under your control, and therefore they have no allies, and they don't keep your laws, worthwhile to destroy them. That's a matter of state. That's an affair of state. For the stability and productivity of the kingdom, it's a good move. What has that got to do with taking their possessions? How does that fit in? Indeed, if you have the state in mind, make all their possessions property of the state. They're endangering the state. The king, through his control, is stopping their threat. Let the royal treasuries benefit from their property, especially since Ahasuerus used his royal treasury for the good of the people generally. So the suspicion is that the motivation isn't pure. If you're going to motivate people by saying, and by the way, you can take the Jews' house, then the idea that the Jews are evil and they're plotting to overthrow and they're stealing and so forth and so on, yeah, sort of, nice talking point. Somebody asks you why you're doing it. You can always trot out that explanation, that justification. But if you're going to take the money in the end, a strong suspicion that a lot of it is just rationalization, so that you can take their money. We saw this in the most bitter possible fashion when Jews, the few who were left in Europe, went back to their homes to reclaim their homes, which were of course occupied by non-Jews. Some of them were killed. In Poland, some Jews were killed after the Holocaust because I don't want to give up my house. Who told you to come back? Too bad the Nazis didn't kill you. You're certainly not getting your house. And if you make a fuss, I'll make sure that you don't get your house. I'll kill you. So all the high-sounding explanations, this gives the lie that they're after their money. A large part of it is simply the selfish motivation. They may hate Jews, but not because they're bad for the king, not because they're bad for the kingdom. I hate one and I want to kill him. So this paints correctly the low status of the attack. And what was the response? And you, with your great mercy, uprooted his strategy. Eitz is usually advice. You spoiled his thought, and you delivered his compensation on his head, what he deserved, what he earned by what he did, and you hung him, and they hung him and his sons on the tree. So I think there's a double idea here. Yeah, their threat was avoided, the Jews were not harmed, and he and his sons were killed. But more than that, they were killed in a way that reveals the divine presence here. Why kill them? Why hang them on the tree that he had prepared for Mordechai? Only because Esther asked that it should be done. A person who looks at it, who knows what the tree was constructed for, is going to be struck, how ironical. The tree that he had built to hang Mordechai, that's the tree that he and his children are hung on. How ironical. Now, irony is a sense that what happens in history isn't just accidental. It's a sense that there's an intelligence running history in such a way that you can see connections. Connections which, if it weren't managed, wouldn't be there. I think I mentioned this, that Yisro says, when he comes to Moses in the wilderness, said, what impressed me was, Kiva davar asher zadu alehem. The thing that the Egyptians used against the Jews, in particular to drown their male children, when they had a tradition that a savior would be born, and they wanted to avoid it, so they drowned all the male children. They used water to drown them in. That's exactly how HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroyed them. At the crossing of the sea, when the whole army was drowned, HaKadosh Baruch Hu used water. So Yisro says, not only were they defeated, but they're defeated in such a way that an irony was built in. This instrument that you used to destroy Jews is being used against you. That shows an intelligence that wants it to be visible that this isn't by chance. So that's what you have here. If he builds the tree as a gallows to hang Mordechai, and he gets hung on that very same tree that he himself created, that irony is something which many people will see, will appreciate, and will say, well, then this isn't accidental. It's not an accidental event that took place. And that's the one part out of all the things in the Megillah that's mentioned here that's to be a matter of thanksgiving. Now, I think we could generalize the idea here. Classically, the Shemona Esrei is divided into three pieces. You start with praise of God. In the middle, there's petition. On the weekdays, that's the lion's share. The majority of his petition. And then at the end, we are told, is gratitude, thanksgiving. Now, there are other things there also. Sim Shalom is there. Okay, I'm not going to go into that. But the third section is called giving thanks, expressing gratitude. Let's think about this. I'm coming before the king. I have certain petitions. The real reason that I come in prayer is because I want to present my petitions. But I'm not going to just walk in and say, hey, king, give me X, Y, Z. First of all, I start with praise because I want the king to know that I appreciate his greatness to the extent that I'm capable of appreciating it. And I appreciate the relationship between us, that we're dependent upon him, that he supports us. Now let's see. That's one thing I would like to do before I ask my petitions. Wouldn't it be reasonable also, before I make my petitions, to express gratitude for the things he's already given me? You supported me for so many years. You helped me 10 years ago. I didn't forget that. I'm still grateful for it. You helped me 5 years ago. And then say, and now, here's what I need. Why would Thanksgiving be put at the end? Well, what's the point of doing that? That bothered me for many years. Then I came across a quotation from the Shloah HaKadosh. When we ask for something, the Shloah says, we're guaranteed we're going to get it. If it's a sincere petition, we're guaranteed we're going to get it. There are verses in the Tanakh, and Ashrei also, which make it sound that way. And although it may not come immediately, and it may come in exact the same form that I asked for it, but no request ever is turned away with a no. So I thought, that's interesting. The Shloah, a great German Baal Kabbalah mystic, says so. That's certainly mashu. Then, about 9 years ago, the previous cycle of the Daf Yomi, I realized that it's a pretty explicit Gemara. Because the Gemara asks, when you pray the Shemona Esrei, you take 3 steps forward, then you recite the entire prayer, and at the end you take 3 steps backwards, and then the Gemara says, like a servant who's received a gift from his master. Oh ho, that's my position. That's my condition. I'm stepping back like a servant who received a gift from his master. That sounds like you did get it. That's the norm. The norm is you are receiving a gift from the master. So then I thought to myself, well, maybe that's the reason why the expression of gratitude is at the end. The expression of gratitude is at the end because I'm not giving gratitude for what he gave me 6 months ago and 2 years ago and 10 years ago, which then would be reasonable to use as a prelude to my petitions. I appreciate all the support in the past. No! The gratitude is for what he gave me now. If I put the gratitude in the beginning, I will not be saying thank you for what he gave me now. And again, let's say, I'll give you an example of what I mean. It's July, and you're working for IBM, and you haven't had a raise in 3 years, and you think you're doing good work, and you think you deserve a raise. So you say to your superior, for 3 years, haven't had a raise, I think my work deserves it. The superior says, I'll take it up with the higher-ups, and I'll see what they say. 2 weeks later, he comes back, and he says, they agree with you, you deserve a raise, January 1st, you're getting a 10% raise. Okay, but now it's July. Do you say thank you? Oh yeah, you say thank you right away. Because in 6 months, your salary is going up 10%. You have the commitment. In fact, you didn't get a nickel in your hand until 6 months from now, so what? You now know that in January it's going up 10%. So when you make a petition, if you make a petition sincerely, and you have a guarantee that Hakadosh Baruch Hu is saying yes, that's the reason why you should say thank you now. Okay, now, in the modim, which is at the end, which is now for the yes you just got, we have these 2 historical events, Hanukkah and Purim, which are included in the thank you at great length. I think what we should do is look at these as examples. We should look at these as examples. And we should broaden our minds to think what has happened more recently and what challenges are we facing now, and have in mind when we make our petition, as we should, that should be obvious. I'm sure that the Ukrainian Jews, I don't know where they get their numbers from, but I see estimates there are 200,000 Ukrainian Jews. I'm sure their prayers are very heartfelt, and ours should be heartfelt also on their behalf, because they're facing terrible, terrible danger. I haven't heard any, so far, anti-Jewish sentiment on either side of the war. And as some commentators have pointed out, usually when things are going badly, Jews get blamed. So far, Baruch Hashem, neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians are blaming things on Jews. Would not be unusual for them both to blame Jews. But they're in danger. So, to think of when Jews have been in danger in the past and where Jews are in danger now, and to have them in mind, and then when we say thank you in the modim for the salvations of the past, to include the salvations of the more recent past, and also for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's commitment to have salvations for Jews that are now in danger, all that would be relevant to do. That's what I mean by generalizing it, not limiting it only to a historical past, but thinking of it as a theme in Jewish history. This kind of thing happens over and over again. I'm trying to think of the source of it now. I know this is just a copy. Mark Twain said, when you come home at night, give your son a patch. Give him a smack. Why? Because if you don't know what he did, he knows what he did. You can guarantee that every day something went wrong. Give him a smack. I've heard a similar idea. If you would know what the non-Jewish world has planned against you, and the extent to which it took efforts to carry it out, and it was overturned without you even knowing you were in danger, you have a much bigger picture of the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects you. The Gemara's analogy is one lamb among 70 wolves. What chance does the lamb have? How long do you think the lamb will last? 20 seconds or 10 seconds? So if the very fact that we are among these nations of the world and we survive at all means that the Kodesh Baruch Hu is thwarting attacks against us all the time, we just don't know about it. And that's the idea of Mogain. We say Melech Ozer or Mashiach Mogain. Mogain is a shield. A shield protects you from the danger reaching you. A savior is someone who helps you when the danger has reached you and it's in the process of destroying you. And he saves you. Ozer is someone who helps you when you're trying to deal with your circumstances. But Mogain means it never reaches you. There's a shield. There's a great deal of efforts against us, which indeed are thwarted in ways that we can't even imagine. Some people try to speculate what would have happened if the Nazis had conquered England. One explanation of why England survived is that the Nazis didn't want to invade. And they didn't want to invade because it was to them a tragedy that two Aryan nations should fight one another. Because their ideology was racist, and the Aryan race should rule the world. To have two Aryan races fight one another is a tragedy. It contradicted the superiority of their racial basis. So they hoped to subdue England by bombing, especially with the rockets that they invented, and hopefully that the Jews, the English will just agree to give up, at least go neutral, to give up. And of course they didn't. But that means that it was his ideology which tripped him up in the end. It's not so different from Haman being hung on the same tree. Another thing that I have heard, I'm not a historian of the period, but I have heard that they too could possibly have created an atomic bomb, but some of the scientists who were Nazis said, relativity was made by a Jew, it can't be right. It can't be true. Jews don't create true things, they only create false things. And since it's relativity that's required to know how the atom bomb works, they wouldn't deal with it. So again, their ideology tripped them up, the very ideology which they were so proud of and which seems to have lent them so much success, that very same ideology tripped them up. And because England was available, the Americans could send their materials there and then use that as a launching pad for attacks on Nazi-held Europe. We didn't have long-distance bombers like we have today. If you flew across the atomic ocean, the plane was finished. That's all. Had to land. And if there was no place to land, there was no place to attack from. Anyway, this is just illustrations that come to light afterwards, which, if we understood them, we would understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is thwarting these types of things happening to us all the time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to survive. That's what Rabbi Mazelman says. We quoted this. When Esther wants to find out what's going on, she says, Maza ve'al maza. What is this? And what is it in factual, in concrete terms? And what does divine providence want from it? We said you need to know both, because without knowing both, you can't deal with the situation in an appropriate way. Part of divine providence is that our continued existence in the world isn't natural. So when tragedies overcome the Jewish people, the model that we have sinned and therefore are being punished may be in a certain sense superficial. It isn't as if neutrally you're fine. Now let's see what you do. Do bad things? Do bad things? You deserve a slap. No. It's that neutrally you're dead. Neutrally you can't exist. Neutrally you shouldn't be here. You have to do something to deserve special divine providence to maintain your existence. If you don't live up to that challenge, then Akadosh Baruch Hu simply withdraws his protection, and then the forces that are around you attack you. So it isn't a slap. It's rather removing protection from enemies who want to kill you. That makes the dynamics in spiritual terms and psychological terms very different. And that means that when things are okay, just okay, that's a spectacular gift. Because left to our own devices, they shouldn't be okay. They should be terrible. And that means the gratitude has to be even stronger than what you thought. Okay, that's what I wanted to leave you with. Tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we'll start some kind of new program.